Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that a foreign country had built a military base in your neighborhood. Not far away, not across the country, right there on your street. Armed soldiers, foreign flags, fighter jets overhead. You would probably call that an occupation. And yet, right now, the United States of America operates over 800 military bases in more than 80 countries around the world. More than 800. In countries that have never attacked the United States. In nations thousands of miles from American shores. In places most Americans could not find on a map. The official explanation is simple. These bases exist to defend America, to protect allies, to keep the world safe and stable. But what if that explanation is only part of the story? What if the real reason has far less to do with defense and far more to do with something much older, much more ambitious, and much more honest about how global power actually works? Today, we are going to follow the money, follow the history, and follow the map. Because when you do, a very different picture emerges. One that the Pentagon press releases do not advertise. One that challenges everything you think you know about why America is everywhere. Let us start with the sheer scale, because it is genuinely staggering. The United States spends over $800 billion on its military every single year. That is more than the next 10 countries combined. China, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, India, Saudi Arabia, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Add them all together. The United States still spends more. But spending alone does not tell the full story. The geography does. According to the Pentagon's own Base Structure Report, the United States maintains roughly 750 to 800 known overseas military installations. That number does not include classified sites, temporary forward operating bases, or the numerous facilities operated in secret under bilateral agreements. To put this in historical context, no empire in the history of human civilization has ever projected military force across the globe at this scale. Not Rome, not the British Empire at its peak, not the Mongols, the Ottomans, or the Spanish colonial system. Nobody, not even close. The Roman Empire at its height controlled perhaps 30 to 40 legionary fortresses, mostly concentrated along its borders. The British Empire, the largest in history by territory, relied primarily on naval power and a relatively small number of strategic ports. The United States has bases in Germany, in Japan, in South Korea, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Djibouti, in Colombia, in Australia, in Italy, in Spain, in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Greenland, in Guam, in the Philippines, in Kuwait, in Iraq, in Syria. The list goes on and on and on. So the question is not just how this happened. The question is why. And the answer requires going back to 1945. When World War II ended in 1945, The United States found itself in a position no country had ever occupied before. It was the only major power whose homeland had not been bombed, invaded, or destroyed. While Europe and Asia lay in ruins, American factories were running at full capacity. American farmland was intact. American cities were untouched. In that moment, the United States held approximately 50% of the entire world's economic output, half of the whole planet. American policymakers, led by figures like Dean Acheson, George Marshall, and George Kennan, faced a historic choice. They could withdraw, as they had after World War I, bring the troops home, rebuild the domestic economy, let Europe and Asia sort themselves out. Or they could do something entirely new. They could design a world order, an international system built around American power, American values, and American economic interests. A world where the dollar was the global reserve currency, where American companies had access to global markets, and where American military strength underwrote the entire arrangement. They chose the second option, and to make it work, they needed forward presence. They needed to be everywhere. The bases that were established in Germany, Japan, and South Korea after the war were not just about defending those countries from Soviet aggression. They were about establishing permanent American presence at the crossroads of global power. They were tripwires, yes, but they were also anchors. Anchors of an empire that dared not speak its name. The Cold War provided a convenient justification for all of it. The Soviet threat was real. Containment was a legitimate strategy. But the infrastructure that was built to contain the Soviet Union outlasted the Soviet Union by decades. The USSR collapsed in 1991. The bases remained. New ones were added. That should tell you something.
To understand why the bases are really there, you need to understand the petrodollar system. Because this is where the geopolitical and the economic become one and the same thing. In 1971, President Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold. The Bretton Woods system, which had backed every dollar with a fixed amount of gold, was over. The dollar suddenly had no intrinsic backing. Nothing standing behind it except the promise of the United States government. So how do you maintain confidence in a currency backed by nothing? You make the world need it. In 1973 and 1974, the Nixon administration, led primarily by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, brokered a series of agreements with Saudi Arabia. The deal was elegant in its ruthlessness. Saudi Arabia and the other OPEC nations would denominate all oil sales exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, the United States would guarantee Saudi's security with military protection and weapons sales. The consequences were profound. If every country on Earth needed oil to run its economy, and if oil could only be purchased in dollars, then every country on Earth needed to hold dollars. The United States could print money to pay its bills. Other countries had to earn it. But here is the critical point. To maintain this system, the United States needed to guarantee that the global oil supply would keep flowing. And that required military dominance of the Persian Gulf, permanently. That is why there are American bases in Bahrain, home to the U.S. Fifth Fleet, In Qatar, home to Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American air base in the Middle East. In Kuwait, in the United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia itself. These are not defensive installations in any traditional sense. They are the military infrastructure of a global monetary system. They are how America enforces the rules of its economic empire without ever having to call it that. Remove those bases, and the petrodollar system becomes vulnerable. Let the petrodollar system collapse, and the United States loses its ability to run perpetual deficits without consequence. Suddenly, every American policy choice becomes constrained. Every social program, every tax cut, every military adventure. The bases are not protecting America from attack. They are protecting the financial architecture that allows America to live beyond its means. There is another layer to this story that rarely gets discussed in polite company: the relationship between American military presence and American corporate interests. The United States military does not just protect American citizens. It protects American investments, American supply chains, American access to foreign markets, American companies operating in politically unstable regions. When the United States established bases in the Philippines in the early 20th century, it was not purely strategic. The Philippines was a key trading hub with access to Asian markets. American sugar companies, tobacco companies, and mining interests had enormous stakes in the region. When the United States has repeatedly intervened in Latin America, the pattern is remarkably consistent. American troops, or CIA-backed forces, appear shortly after foreign governments threaten to nationalize industries owned by American corporations. United Fruit in Guatemala, oil companies in Iran, copper mines in Chile. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented history, much of it declassified and available in the National Security Archive. Today, the relationship between the defense industry and military expansion is even more direct. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman collectively receive hundreds of billions of dollars in Pentagon contracts every year. Their lobbyists are among the most powerful in Washington. Their executives rotate in and out of senior Defense Department positions through a well-worn revolving door. More bases mean more contracts. More contracts mean more profits. More profits mean more lobbying. More lobbying means more political support for more bases. The cycle is self-reinforcing and deeply embedded in the American political economy. President Dwight Eisenhower warned about exactly this dynamic in his farewell address in 1961. He called it the military-industrial complex. He said it posed a grave threat to American democracy, and he was the supreme commander of Allied forces in World War II. Not exactly a peacenik. Nobody listened. Now, it would be unfair to present this as purely American imposition. The reality of the base network is more complicated and more interesting. Many host countries genuinely want American bases, not because they have been coerced, but because the bases offer real strategic benefits. A Japanese government worried about Chinese naval expansion in the South China Sea has strong reasons to want American forces stationed in Okinawa and across the Japanese archipelago. A South Korean government facing North Korean nuclear threats has every incentive to maintain the American military presence along the demilitarized zone. American bases also bring economic activity, jobs for local contractors, business for local shops and restaurants, infrastructure development. In many host communities, the relationship with the American military is economically significant.
But the relationship is never simple, and it is never free of tension. In Okinawa, Japan, where a large concentration of American forces is based, there has been decades of protest from local residents. Noise pollution, accidents, crime. The sense that a foreign military occupies their land without genuine accountability to local law or local concerns. Polls consistently show majority opposition to the base presence among Okinawans, even as the Japanese central government supports it. In Germany, public opinion toward American bases has been mixed for generations. During the Cold War, many West Germans genuinely saw the bases as protection. After 1991, many began asking when exactly the occupation would end. In the Philippines, public pressure became so intense that the United States was actually forced to close its massive Clark Air Base and Subic Bay Naval Station in 1991 and 1992. The Philippine Senate voted to end the base agreements. The Americans left, only to negotiate new access arrangements in the years that followed. The pattern repeats. Bases create dependency. Dependency creates resentment. Resentment creates pressure. But the strategic logic rarely allows for clean withdrawal. Let us talk about what this costs, not in abstract billions, but in concrete terms. The United States spends an estimated $150 billion per year just on its overseas basing infrastructure. That is not the cost of wars. That is not weapons procurement. That is simply the cost of maintaining the physical presence of American forces abroad. Buildings, runways, vehicles, personnel, logistics. To put that in context, $150 billion would fully fund the entire NASA budget for about 20 years. It would eliminate the U.S. student loan crisis. It would provide universal pre-kindergarten education for every American child for a generation. There are also human costs that rarely appear in budget spreadsheets. Over 7,000 American service members have died in the post-September 11th wars. Hundreds of thousands have returned with physical and psychological wounds that will define the rest of their lives. Veteran suicide rates in the United States are alarmingly high. The VA healthcare system is perpetually overwhelmed, and the costs borne by people in the countries where these conflicts occur are orders of magnitude larger. Conservative estimates put civilian deaths in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia at over 900,000 since 2001. The true number is likely much higher. These are not abstractions. They are the real price of empire. The American base network was designed for a world that no longer fully exists, a world of American economic dominance, unchallenged military supremacy, and a rules-based international order with the United States at the center. That world is being contested in ways that would have seemed impossible 30 years ago. China has spent the past 2 decades on a deliberate strategy of military modernization and geographic expansion. It has built artificial islands in the South China Sea and equipped them with military installations, airstrips, and missile batteries. It has established its first overseas military base in Djibouti, just miles from an American facility. It has its naval presence into the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, and the Atlantic. China currently has 1 overseas base. the United States has over 800. But the trajectory matters more than the current number. Russia, while economically far smaller than either China or the United States, has demonstrated its willingness to use military force to prevent the further expansion of American military infrastructure into what it considers its sphere of influence. The wars in Georgia, Ukraine, and Syria are, among other things, about where the American military presence ends and Russian strategic space begins. Meanwhile, the financial underpinnings of American power are under increasing pressure. The share of global trade conducted in US dollars has been declining. Russia and China have been settling energy trades in yuan and rubles. Several countries are reducing their holdings of US Treasury bonds. The BRICS nations are exploring alternative payment systems. None of this means the collapse of American power is imminent. But it does mean that the strategic logic that justified 800 bases is being tested in ways that demand serious reconsideration.
Here is what is remarkable about all of this. In the United States, there is virtually no serious public debate about the base network. It is not a topic in presidential campaigns. It is not examined in school curricula. It is not the subject of major investigative journalism series in mainstream outlets. Americans argue endlessly about tax rates, immigration policy, healthcare, and social issues. These are important debates, but the decision to maintain a military presence in 80 countries at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars per year, with all the geopolitical consequences that entails, happens almost entirely outside democratic accountability. The foreign policy establishment, drawn from a relatively small pool of think tanks, universities, law firms, and consulting groups, largely shares a consensus that forward presence is essential and non-negotiable. Voices that question this consensus are marginalized as naive, isolationist, or insufficiently serious. And yet the empirical record raises serious questions. The wars enabled by this forward presence have not produced stable democracies. They have not made the world safer in any obvious way. They have consumed enormous resources and generated enormous resentment. A democracy should be able to ask whether its military strategy is working. The United States, for the most part, does not. So where does this leave us? The 800 military bases are not primarily about defense. They are about power. The power to shape the global economy. The power to determine which governments survive and which fall. The power to ensure that American companies, American investors, and the American dollar remain at the center of the global system. None of this makes the United States uniquely evil. Every great power in history has used military force to protect its economic interests and extend its influence. The Romans did it. The British did it. The Mongols did it. The difference is scale, sophistication, and the peculiarly American habit of describing imperial behavior in the language of freedom and democracy. What makes this moment genuinely different is that the system is under real strain for the first time in decades. The economic foundations are shifting. The military supremacy is being challenged. The ideological legitimacy is questioned from within and without. Whether you believe the global American military presence has made the world safer, or whether you believe it has primarily served elite interests at enormous cost to ordinary people, one thing is undeniable. It is the most consequential fact of our geopolitical moment, and it deserves serious,
honest, democratic conversation. Not just in Washington, not just in think tanks, but among the people who pay for it and whose sons and daughters fight in it. Because the real reason the United States has 800 military bases is not written in any official document. It is written in the map of global power. And learning to read that map may be the most important thing any citizen can do. If this video changed how you think about American power, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for more honest, evidence-based analysis of the forces shaping our world. And drop your thoughts in the comments. This is exactly the kind of conversation that matters.